It was the father. I noticed something though. It was that he was missing fingers and toes, along with other chunks of skin. The boys had been mutilating him slowly. I walked to the bedside and put my hand on his arm. Mr. Raymond was the father. Who is that? He gasped, squinting his eyes. He was struggling to see me, but he was alive. I looked around to see if I could free him from his restraints, but I couldn't. Who are you? I'm with Child Services, I replied. Get us out of here, he cried out. Something is wrong with my boys, and they need help. I've already called the police. They will be here soon. We just need to hang tight. That is when I heard a sound coming from the house. I walked into the hallway to see the front door. Someone was trying to open it. But I did not hear the police sirens. It had to be the boys. Bob, where are you? I cried out. The door started to shake violently, and I could see Barb finally. She walked to the door, looking at it curiously. She must have thought it was the police and was going to innocently let the boys in here. Barb, don't open the door, I screamed. She turned her head to me quickly as her hand rested on the doorknob. That's when the sound of sirens came. Barb ran away quickly, and I turned back into the room of Mr. Raymond. He could hear them too. I could see a weak smile on his face. I'm going to get the four of you out of here and get your boys some help, I said. Just get the boys out of here. They need help because...
Know what it would feel like. I know, oh, hey, bad ideas, eh? I know where they lead.
Something is wrong with them. What about your daughter? He coughed and looked confused. I don't have a daughter. My neighbor won't stop singing Christmas carols. It's a little bit ridiculous to hear Deck the Halls not long after Halloween. I mean, I'm all for the spirit of Christmas and I'm no Grinch, but to wake up at 6 a.m. on November and hear my neighbors singing was enough to irritate me. I've lived in this house going on 3 years, and I know the neighbors in the sense that we've waved while taking care of our yards and discussed the weather if we happen to see each other outside while taking the trash cans out or checking the mail. A nice family of 3, or 4 if you include their dog Cello. I've seen them decorate the house for all the major holidays, and last year they at least waited until after Thanksgiving to start putting up Christmas lights and such. Our houses are not made of paper either, and we both have a decent enough yard that I've never heard so much as a loud television or even music come from that house. So, this is the first time I've ever heard them singing, and they must be really going all out for it to carry this well. When it woke me at 6, I attempted to cover my head with my pillow, which didn't work. Then, I turned on an ambient white noise sound, and thankfully that lulled me back to sleep. The problem is that when I woke up at a comfortable 8 a.m, they were still singing. Not Deck the Halls, but now they were singing Joy to the World. Again, it's November. I've tried to shrug it off and go about my morning. I took a hot shower and brushed my teeth, made some toast and slipped on my work shoes, all while hearing Joy to the World. They must be singing the song several times each, because I know for a fact they started with Deck the Halls. I usually left my house through the carport door, but I wanted to check out their house and see if these maniacs had already decorated their house as well. When I stepped out of my front door, I immediately noticed the wife and daughter standing on their doorstep in their night clothes. They were both facing the inside of the house and singing to their husband, Arnold, or as he liked to be called, Arnie, who stood in the doorway with one hand on the door as if he'd just opened it. These people were caroling their own house. And the daughter, I think her name was Tanya or something like that, probably should be in school. "Taking a sick day, folks?" I asked with a raised voice to call over the singing. They didn't reply, so I stepped closer to my vehicle in the driveway and looked back towards their house again. Arnie looked back at me with just his eyes and a wide grin that looked strained. "You guys taking requests?" I asked. Again, they didn't reply. Not very Christmassy of them to ignore me, I thought, before climbing into my vehicle and heading to work. I got home at 4, and they were still singing. Right now, it's silent night. The wife and daughter are still in their night clothes, and Arnie still held the door wide open. First thing I did when I pulled in was honk a few times to try and get their attention, but they didn't stop. They didn't even turn their heads to look at me. I stepped out of the car and started across the small patch of grass that separated our houses. I was in his lawn and maybe 5 feet from them when I heard something else. Something mixed in with the singing. I stopped and tried to isolate the sound. It seemed to be coming from inside. I looked up and caught Arnie's eyes. It was him. He was making noises through his wide, forced smile and clenched teeth. I froze and stared at him. "Arnie, what's going on here? Are you guys okay?" I asked nervously. Um, he grunted back, his eyes shifting left to right quickly. I took it as a no. I stepped forward again, but he grunted so loudly that I recalled back to where I was. "Arnie, what's going on?" I asked, not sure of how he could explain with grunts. I looked at his wife and daughter quickly. The poor girls were shoeless, standing in small, half-dried puddles of their own urine. Arnie as well. They had stood there all day long. "Arnie?" I didn't even know what to say. I could barely think over the damn singing. I could hear their voices breaking a bit. Surely they would lose their voices soon. Another loud grunt, and I looked back to Arnie. His eyes were darting over his left shoulder. Without getting closer, I tried to peek into the open house. Between his wife and daughter, and under his arm, I could see what looked like a Christmas tree they'd set up. A tall tree, so thickly covered in dark green pine needles that I could barely make out the full shape of it. It hadn't been decorated yet, but boxes of ornaments and lights were at its base. "The tree?" I asked. Arnie groaned once, loudly, in acknowledgement. I crouched a little to see the tree more. The dog Cello lay at the tree's trunk. A branch protruded from the dog's stomach in a mixture of blood and fur. I wanted to gag. It looked like one of them had made me stab the dog with a branch. No, the branch was still attached to the tree. I hesitated and took a step closer to see around. As he did, the tree nervously shook, and the branches retreated back into the pine quickly. This was enough for me. I turned and unlocked my front door quickly, stepped in and slammed it closed, all while hearing the girls' broken voices singing "We Wish You Merry Christmas." I pulled out my phone and called 911. As soon as the operator answered, I gave them my address and tried to explain what I had seen. The operator seemed unsure, but said they would send someone over anyway. When I hung up, I heard a faint voice outside. I checked through the blinds and saw the neighbor from the other side of Arnie's house storming across his yard and shaking his fist at them. "God damn it, Arnold, shut these women up and do this inside your house, not out here where all of us have to listen to this crap all day," barked the neighbor. I didn't know his name. He was moving quickly towards them. I opened my door and stepped outside. "Sir, hang on," I said hesitantly, not really sure what I was even stopping him from. He didn't hear me at all, or was so enraged that he tuned me out. He crossed his yard and into theirs. I looked past him and saw who I assumed to be his wife, an equally elderly woman, standing at the door looking over. "Hello? Earth to Wendy, Earth to Arnie. Did you hear a damn word I said?" He reached them, and he stopped talking. He froze about 6 inches closer to them than I had gotten. He turned to face Arnie and opened his mouth and began to sing along with them. His raspy old voice mixed in with the voices of Wendy and their daughter, Tanya. Ben, what are you doing? Ben?" called the other neighbor's wife. She stepped onto the grass of her own yard. This time I yelled out, Don't go near them." "What is he doing? What are any of them doing?" she asked, confused. "I don't know what's going on," I replied truthfully. Cautiously, I walked across their yard until I was in front of the door, but far enough from it that I didn't think I was going to start singing anytime soon. I looked at Arnie, who had tears running down his widely grinning face. I walked further around until I was closer to the other neighbor. I looked back at the carolers and could see the mother and daughter's faces were wet with tears, but still, they sang. And the old man Ben, singing right along with them. Sirens cut through the Christmas carols as a patrol car came down the road towards us. I walked out to the curb and waved them down while I looked around to see the neighbors across the street had stepped out to watch, as well as the neighbors a few houses down. They all looked on, confused. The patrol car pulled up and 2 officers stepped out. The first was taller and bald. The second was older and just barely overweight. "What's going on here?" the tall one asked. I walked closer to them and quickly explained everything I could. It made no sense as I said it out loud, but the officers listened, each one turning a curious eye towards the carolers. "And you said this man started singing when he got close to them?" the other asked. "Yes, I got close, but obviously not as close as he did," I explained. "And you don't feel like singing?" the other asked with a slight smile. "No. Look, do you think I would have called this in if this wasn't serious?" I demanded. That officer stopped smiling and turned towards my neighbor's house. As he stepped towards them, I heard a car pull into a nearby driveway. I turned to see if it was another cop car. It wasn't. Just one of the neighbors pulling in with her own dark green Christmas tree strapped to the top of the SUV. I turned back to the carolers and watched the older officer keeping a safe distance and calling out to them several times. No replies. The officer returned to us and shrugged. "I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here. They aren't breaking any laws exactly," said the officer that had gone forward. The taller officer began talking into his radio, explaining the situation to someone at what I assumed to be the police station. I looked around at the neighbors, standing about watching. Some had joined each other in discussion, all while this family and the man named Ben began to sing Jingle Bells. After a few minutes of waiting around, I looked back towards the neighbors in the SUV. They had removed their tree and disappeared into their house. Odd that 2 families should be setting up trees so soon. Odder that the trees looked so similar. Same dark color and excessive thickness to the pine needles. My stomach dropped. I turned to one of the officers. "Hey, they had a tree just like theirs," I said, pointing to the other house. As I did, the officers followed my pointing. We all looked over at the house about 4 down from mine as the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She turned to face the open house where a man stood holding the door. His face was a wide, toothy grin, and she began to sing, perfectly in tune with my neighbors. They all sang. Well, it's been a couple of days since then. That's because things have gotten more and more strange around here. We tried a number of ideas. We did in fact use ropes to pull my neighbors from their doorsteps. Once they were at a safe distance, they snapped out of their trance or whatever it was immediately, dehydrated and half-starved. Once the police officers that showed up and I pulled all the neighbors to safety, I suggested that we burn the trees. None of them were too keen to burn their houses down at first. We weren't positive it was the trees because none of them could talk until their sore throat had healed up enough to give us an explanation. But once they could speak, they told us everything they knew. Apparently, my immediate neighbor, Arnie, and his family had gone to a local tree farm simply to enjoy the outdoors and scout some of the potential trees for the upcoming holiday. They had no intention of actually buying a tree this early. The poor man just wanted to take his wife and daughter out for some family time. He said that while they walked, their daughter, Tanya, had told them she saw something small moving between the trees. Her parents thought it was just a young imagination running wild. Whatever it was had led Tanya and her family to a certain area of the tree farm where all the trees were tall and heavily laden with dark green pines. Arnie said the rest is sort of blurry, like a dream, but he remembers feeling obligated to take a tree home immediately. They used tools from the barn and cut the tree down themselves. None of them remember paying for the tree or even driving home. The other neighbor that had set up their tree second had a very similar experience. I found out that their names are Dylan and Ashley, and this was their first year in the new house. Both families mentioned seeing something moving between the trees, sort of leading them to the part of the tree farm where the thick trees were. Since nobody wanted to risk being forced to sing Christmas carols non-stop, the police and a few others in the neighborhood used drones to see what was going on. We used the drones to go into the house and investigate the trees. Both houses had the same situation. The tree was set up and decorations were placed around the base. The families then must have been forced to begin singing while whatever was in the tree consumed the family pet. For Arnie, their pet cello still lay at the base of the tree, now emptied of blood. For Dylan and Ashley, they had a cat. Had. While we discussed our options on how to handle this, one of the drones was knocked down by something inside the tree. When we replayed the video, we could see a long, narrow, what looked like a branch, reach out of the tree and smack the drone to the floor. It then made a gurgle and a click noise and receded back into the tree. The police left the affected families in the hospital while they roped off their houses. They sent units out to the tree farm to investigate, and 2 patrol cars remained behind to keep an eye on the houses. That was the last I talked to the police. I came home and looked up whatever I could online. The closest thing I can think of is some kind of trickster goblin called a Killikonsaros. But aside from the pure absurdity of it, these creatures weren't supposed to appear until the 12 days of Christmas, being December 25th to January 6th, so they were extremely early. I kept peeking through the blinds as I did what research I could. The neighbor's door had been closed, I'm assuming by use of ropes. But knowing what had just happened, I couldn't help but be curious. Not white people in a haunted house curious, but curious enough to keep an eye on the house. Surprisingly, the news hadn't picked up the story, and no announcements had been made about staying away from the tree farm. I called one of the officers that had left me their card, hoping for an update or an explanation, but he didn't answer. I was ready to call it a night when I saw movement next door. It was quick, but sent a shadow across the window. It caught my attention, and I began to stare across the yard. It looked like a bush itself, scurrying across the kitchen. It used dark, thin arms to open cabinets, close and open the curtains, and even open the refrigerator. Its body was made up of the same thick, dark pine that the tree was. So much so that I started to wonder if what I had seen of the tree had been just the creature itself in hiding. I tried my phone again to alert the officers. No answer. I watched the thing move around the house quickly. Then another appeared, and another. Soon, I had my eye on 4 of these things trapped inside my neighbor's house. I called 911, but it only rang and rang. Now, I've called this number more than a few times, and I knew that in an emergency, if the nearest apartment didn't pick up, it would pass you through to the next nearest facility. It didn't do that. I hung up and pocketed my phone. Then I watched as these things moved into the living room and I lost sight of them. I went into my bedroom and pulled my pistol out of the nightstand. I remembered the 2 patrol cars that were on the street, so I opened up my front door very slowly and walked out into the driveway to get a better look at my neighbor's house. Their front door was open. I swore out loud and looked down the street towards Dylan and Ashley's house. Their door was open as well. These things had escaped. I turned towards one of the patrol cars. It was empty, and the door had been left open. That's when I heard it. Someone had started singing Silent Night. I followed the sound of the singing, at a safe distance, to the end of the street. Each of my neighbors' houses had their doors open, and the singing was much louder now and sounded more like a choir than a single person. I looked back towards my house and watched, to my shock, as one of these pine goblins or whatever scampered into my house. I went to duck beneath a bush, hesitated to make sure it was in fact a bush. Once I verified that it was a shrubbery, I hid behind it. The creature half walked, half hopped through my house, opening doors and cabinets and knocking things over like misbehaved children in a store. It clucked or giggled when things broke. When it was certain that my house was empty, it scurried outside and moved in the direction of the choir. Passing in front of me by about 10 feet, I could make out its shape a little better. The thing looked like a pine needle version of Cousin from the Addams Family. It moved with small, branch-like spindly arms at its side and little branch-looking feet. I followed at a distance. It was fast. I had to jog a little to keep up, but not too fast because I didn't know exactly how big its sphere of influence was. About 5 blocks down, and passing dozens of open doors, I found the source of the singing. My neighborhood had been gathered by these calicanceros, or pine goblins, or whatever they were, had apparently gone door to door, luring people to it. I watched as all of my neighbors and more walked in one large mass, all singing Silent Night, perfectly in sync. I couldn't see the front of the pack, but I imagined that's where most of the pine goblins were, leading the pack. A few of them walked or danced at the sides of the singing people. They were escorting them somewhere, like a herd of cattle. Some of the creatures would stop at houses and knock on doors. Others would attempt to open them, and if able to, they would step inside and be shortly followed out by one or more persons singing along to join the herd. We moved quickly, the mass slowly gaining more and more singers. After almost 20 minutes of walking, the herd of singers stopped moving. I was far behind, but I froze as well. The people kept singing. They sang without moving for about 10 minutes before starting to walk again. When I caught up to the spot they stopped at, my heart dropped into my stomach. There were at least 10 bodies lying on the ground, each one opened up and drained of blood. The creatures had stopped to feed. I tried my phone again. Still, no answer from emergency services. I could only imagine that they were somewhere singing along to Christmas carols. I continued to follow at a distance, noticing now that they would sing each song at a minimum of 4 times back to back before switching to another. It was always Christian songs and just the classics. We walked for miles. A few times, the first time it happened, a person. But when the car got close, it slowed, stopped, and the people inside would join the herd, singing with the others. It seemed like the area of influence was bigger with this herd, possibly because there were so many of the pine goblins. I was scared before, but when I heard singing from another direction, I started to lose hope. I looked over, across the highway, to see another herd being shepherded by these creatures. It was a larger herd than this one, with dozens of the small green cousin-it creatures around them. I backed off even further, thinking that once these herds combined, there would be no telling how large the influence would be. I slowed down, and that's when I heard someone. Hey buddy. I spun around, pistol out. 3 people were crouched about 20 yards behind me. Whoa, we're not like them. You hear us? Nobody's singing, one of them said. I loaded my weapon. How long have you been following me? We've been watching you for almost an hour, but you were too close, and we didn't want to risk them hearing us, explained the man about my age, maybe 25. Any idea what those things are? I asked. Not really. We know they communicate with clicks and grunts and they drink blood, he said. This time another spoke, a tall woman with black hair. None of these people were familiar to me. A couple days ago, I watched my neighbors carry a tree into their house. I don't think they can only make you sing. I think they can make you set the whole damn tree up. And I've seen piles of decorations at the base of the tree, like some kind of tribute or something. A couple hours later, they started singing. They didn't stop until the police came and pulled the kid out with a rope. His mom was dead by the time they got there. We moved slowly and distantly, explaining what we had seen and heard while we followed the mass of Christmas carolers. A few more miles, another stop while the creatures ate, and we started seeing less and less new people joining. We started walking through areas that looked to have been hit already. Doors were already open, and the creatures didn't stop to check houses anymore. I hate Christmas carols, even in December, muttered the other guy. Where are we going? Asked the youngest of the group, a teenager, Kelly. The rest of us looked around the area, the sounds of Noel carrying across the space between us and the herd. The only thing this direction is the tree farm, the woman said. We stopped and looked back towards the town, our home, left empty while its inhabitants sang Christmas carols and marched towards what we can only imagine as the source of these pine goblin creatures. I logged in as much of this as I could while we were walking. We still have a way to go. We've started gathering supplies from the empty houses, and we each have a backpack with some food and drink. I'm not sure what we're going to do when we reach the tree farm. but we better come up with some ideas. Quick. It took some time for us to make it to the tree farm. The creatures we took to calling pines stopped and fed several times and carried the choir at a slow pace. We were always careful to stay far enough back that we weren't drawn to the endless singing. We walked, mostly in silence, unsure of what to say to each other, while we watched an entire town of people marching and singing what used to be songs of praise and joy, but were now a melody of doom. We would take turns speaking to the youngest, the teenage girl named Kelly. We'd learned that both her parents and a younger brother were part of the mass now. She had been in the shower while the Pines had taken her family. She had come downstairs to an empty house and an open door with the sounds of silent night echoing from outside. The man, roughly my age, named Timothy, he and his boyfriend Eric had followed the crowd when they first saw it, until Eric had recognized the friend and gotten too close. Eric was somewhere in the crowd now. The tall woman, named Sarah, lived alone but had witnessed the Pines going door to door and taking neighbors one by one. When they had come to collect her, she had blocked the door and windows with furniture and hid in her attic. Once she was sure they had gone, she followed and joined the others. And so, of our entire town, as far as we knew, it was only the four of us that did not sing at all. We reached the tree farm at just past 3:30 a.m. when the air was wet and cold. I kept the pistol tucked away, unsure what a bullet would even do to one of these pines. But we'd stopped along the way and managed to pass a gas station where Kelly and Timothy split off and filled a few containers with gasoline.
No, oh, hey. Bad ideas, eh? I know where they lead.
We were now armed with a pistol, 4 gallons of gasoline in various containers,
I know where they lead. I know where they lead.
and each of us carried a lighter and some matches. We had already decided that, if given the opportunity, we would burn the farm to the ground.
But I got too many to I got too many to see, and I can't get enough. No, I wanna kiss you standing up. Oh no. I know where they lead. But I got to guess I just wanna know what it would feel like. I know, oh, hey, bad ideas, eh? I know where they lead. But I got too many to see, and I can't get.
We followed the death choir down the driveway, all while hearing the croaked, hoarse voices singing Christmas carols. Their voices had left most of them some time ago, and we could only imagine what pain they were feeling in their throats. We hung back as the crowd entered into the tree farm. We then watched as individual pines would lead small groups into the trees within the farm. The herd was breaking apart. The singing became spread out. They walked single file through the trees until the driveway was empty and all that could be seen were trees, and all that could be heard was singing. "Well, what do we do now?" asked Sarah. I didn't know what to say or what to do, so I looked at each of them, hoping someone had a plan. "We need to burn the farm down, but we can't do it with everyone spread out like they are. We need a way to separate them from the pines," Timothy explained. "Yeah, if we start a fire, we don't know how well it was spread, if at all," said Sarah. Before anyone could expand, a short whoosh sound was heard, along with a small flash of light. We quickly jerked our attention towards the newly risen flames. Kelly had started pouring gasoline from her containers and was now lighting the area nearest to us on fire. We watched as she tossed a match on a tree and it erupted into flames. "What are you doing? What if it spreads?" demanded Sarah. Faded, and the sounds of chirping and clicks grew louder. Without waiting, I too began to douse the nearest trees in gasoline. Wait, you could burn everyone inside the farm," cried Timothy. "They are as good as dead if we don't do anything, and if we can't get close to them, this is our only option," I said, lighting a match and tossing it into a tree. The would-be Christmas tree exploded into fire. I looked back at Timothy, who hesitantly doused more trees with gasoline. Kelly was now moving deeper into the tree farm, pouring lines of gasoline behind her. "Kelly, be careful," Sarah called to her. Kelly eagerly splashed gasoline on the trees in front of her, then threw the container into the farm. The chirps and clicks grew louder, almost as loud as the singing at the edge of the tree farm as the flames began to burn brightly. Then I saw it. Movement between the trees. The fire had drawn one of the pines towards us. "Everyone, get back! One's here," I called out. Timothy and Sarah backed away from the trees quickly. Kelly pulled another container out and continued to douse the trees. "Kelly, get out of there!" Sarah cried out. The young girl angrily flung gas in every direction. The pine stopped several yards in front of her. Kelly paused for a moment. Then the pine began to move towards her. With a grunt of force, Kelly flung the container at the pine, striking it in the center. gas splashing up around it and then pulled around its feet. The creature stopped and sniffed the air curiously. "Shoot it!" Timothy ordered. I drew the pistol. "Kelly, get down!" I shouted. The girl dove to the ground and I fired. My shot missed as my hands trembled. The pine creature moved forwards again towards Kelly. It was close enough now. I aimed carefully as Kelly sat up. "Oh, come, all ye faithful," Kelly began to sing. Before she could stand up all the way, I fired again. The bullet struck the thing in the chest. I tensed for the pending explosion. Nothing. No fire, no burst, nothing at all. I'd expected the bullet to ignite the gasoline like in the movies, and now, with my gun in my hand, I realized how foolish the idea was. "Kelly, move!" I shouted to the singing girl as she began to stand up. She was lost in trance and would be joining her family in song. Then I saw a fireball being thrown from behind me. I ducked and spun around to see Timothy holding another flaming piece of wood. His first throw had landed on the pine creature, and now, at last, it burst into flames. The pine screeched and chirped wildly. It began to run in small circles, which only fanned the flames, feeding off the gasoline and pine needles that covered its body. The flaming monster ran so wildly that it ignited the gasoline-soaked trees around it. Kelly stopped singing and turned towards us. Sarah raced towards her and pulled her back from the tree farm. "Keep going!" Timothy yelled as he poured gasoline on the ends of anything he could find close by to throw at the tree farm. The singing was growing fainter now, as smoke began to rise in different parts of the tree farm. The creature had retreated to safety of its source, apparently not understanding that it had only spread the flames more. We hurled any flaming object we could into the tree farm and watched as tree after tree ignited. Something moved just out of the corner of my eye. I picked up a flaming branch and prepared to hurl it at the creature. A man started to cough and look around wildly. "What the hell is happening?" he asked, his voice cracked and hoarse. It was working. The man stumbled towards us. "Start burning the farm down," I commanded. "My family," he said hoarsely. "They'll come out, just like you did," I said, unsure of how much truth was in my words, but I knew that this was our only chance now. He then began to pick up flaming branches and throw them at the areas of the farm he had come from. The five of us now spread out and began throwing more and more fire into the farm until the entire farm appeared to be set ablaze. The singing was now mixed between hoarse call-outs and screams of confusion. We began to shout, "This way! Follow my voice! Get out of the fire! Come this way!" I shouted into the burning tree farm. One after another, people walked out, crawled and stumbled towards us from the burning tree farm. They coughed and clutched their throats. The singing was now almost entirely gone, and we could hear something more horrible replace it. True screams, as some of the people must have caught fire. We watched from outside the flames as many people would stop and roll on the ground to save themselves from the fire. Thankfully, it worked, and the more people came out, the more would go back to pull whoever they could from the fires. The pine creatures ran wildly, setting more and more trees on fire, thus killing each other in their panic and setting the cursed carolers free. We watched triumphantly as the Christmas tree farm burned brightly in the rising sun. People staggered out, one after another, and the sound of carolers was gone. Confused, injured, but alive, the people of my town stood outside of the flames and listened to the pine creatures chirping and grunting as their bodies burned and they continued to spread the fire. I sighed relief as Timothy raced around the crowds of people looking for his boyfriend Eric. I watched as Kelly was reunited with her family, and I listened as did the rest of my friends and neighbors, as the pine creatures cried out in a melody of chirps and grunts that replaced the sounds of Christmas carols. A few years ago, my little sister was born. It came after a rough period for my family, including a divorce and some other stuff. Even at my young age, I saw how the pregnancy changed things for the better. After years of arguments and screaming and drinking, it was nice to see something positive on the horizon. So, when my little sister came along, I was the happiest I'd been in years. You don't typically see 13-year-old boys racing to change nappies or volunteer to cover a nighttime feeding, but I did. She's 4 years old now. A while back, I started showing her YouTube videos. Mom works hard, and I wanted to free up the telly so she could relax when getting home instead of watching Baby Shark 900 times. And my little sister fell in love with those unboxing videos and toy videos in general. Even when she couldn't really talk much, she'd lie there, eyes fixed on the tablet, watching these weirdos in cheap-looking costumes play with toys. I never liked watching them. They just weirded me out, partly because I couldn't imagine why an adult would want to sit there and unbox toys for hours on end, and partly because all the outfits and scenes looked cheap and nasty. But lately, I've realized I should have paid a lot more attention to what was going on. Our usual routine was that I'd walk her home and set her up to watch the tablet while I played games on the big TV. Our mum would get home sometime around 8 or 9, and that meant I had a few hours to play with my friends while my sister sat up against me on the sofa or floor. She isn't much of a talker, but one day, last week, she started whining and jabbing the tablet in my direction. I took one look at its lifeless screen, and after messing around with different chargers and wires, I realized the battery was knackered. It was a cheap thing, some weird Chinese brand filled with knockoff apps, and I had no idea how to fix it. I knew it wouldn't be very nice of me to make my sister sit and watch me play games, so I quit the console and pulled up the YouTube app on our telly. After that, I was stuck reading a book while those videos played in the background, where they stayed out of my mind for a good 2 hours. At some point, Mum called me and told me she was going to be working past midnight, so I'd have to sort my sister out. That's when I put down my book, rubbed my eyes, and looked at the telly. There was a woman in an off-brand Elsa costume sitting in front of the camera. Most of the shot was taken up by a puffed-up teal ball gown. Well, more of a costume than a gown. She had this weird, cheap foam head on. The hair, eyes and mouth carved out of it and painted haphazardly. It was just big enough to look weird on a normal head. And her slim frame bobbed up and down eagerly as she leaned into the camera to show off the latest toy. It was a stupid little trinket, a cheap plastic ring painted gold with stickers for jewels, held up to the camera and rotated like a prized diamond. My sister watched, her mouth open, as fake Elsa slid the ring onto her finger and mimed the reaction of a blushing bride. There was no sound, except for the hiss of the microphone, and the whole effect was strangely captivating. But things got weird when Elsa sat back, reached back to grab another toy, and I noticed a picture on the wall. It was hard to tell as she moved around, but the more I stared, the more sure I was that I recognized that picture. It was the one on the wall behind me. Curious, I got up and started looking around the video using the remote. The UI in the TV app is limited, but it showed that the video was just one of hundreds in an autoplay queue, all from different makers. This one had just 13 views, but for some reason, the algorithm had added it to our playlist. Looking closer at the channel, I saw that they had 5 other private videos, but no information about themselves. I navigated back to the video and started rewinding. Skipping through the play bar, I found a shot that offered a clear view of the room behind her. I pressed select and saw the undeniable truth. It was our living room. The same sofa we were sitting on, the same carpet, walls, pictures. Hell, even the stain on the coffee table was there. Something in my stomach sank. I kept looking around. Comments had been disabled. Upload time was just an hour before. That didn't mean anything, I told myself. How could it? I decided to skip forward to the end of the video. Creepy Elsa was showing off a pair of cheap-looking earrings. Her enormous, fake foam head staring at the camera with badly painted eyes and a wide, smiling mouth. The breathing slit awkwardly placed so that it looked like she was missing a whole row of teeth. Suddenly, she sat back and began to look left to right, her head swinging in delayed movements. A quiet sound became faintly audible, and I turned the telly right up, but it still wasn't clear. As the noise got louder, Elsa leaned in, so close to the camera, her face took up the whole screen, and she placed a finger up to her mouth. "Shh," she whispered, quiet as a mouse. This close, I saw her fingers looking bruised and swollen, the tips stained yellow and thick with calluses. Then the woman reached forward, grabbed the camera and stood up, showing off a sweeping view of the furniture, walls, and even our Christmas tree. Slowly, the camera bobbed as she backed out of the living room and into a hallway, pulling the door shut, but leaving a tiny crack for the camera to see through. Something rotten settled in my stomach as the sound of our front door opening could be heard on the video. One by one, my sister and I entered the shot, eerie giggles faintly playing in the background. Slowly, the door was pulled shut the rest of the way, leaving the video in total darkness and silence before it finally ended. My mouth was open, my heart racing. I looked over to the door she'd closed in the video and felt a special sort of panic. No, I kept telling myself, that's just not possible. That was our living room. That was us. Later that night, our mum found us asleep in the bathroom where I'd locked us in. At one point, I tried to get us to our bedrooms, but it involved opening that door, and I couldn't do it. It was pitch black in that hallway, and I knew there was a large airing cupboard under the stairs that made for a perfect hiding spot. I couldn't stop imagining that woman still crouched in there, holding her breath and giggling, her creepy head facing me in total darkness. I couldn't do it. So instead, we slept in the bath. My mum went spare, but nothing I said could convince her of what I'd seen. By the time she'd gotten home, the telly had timed out, and no matter how hard I looked on there, or even my phone, I couldn't find that same video. When I explained the whole thing to her, she sat me down in the kitchen bar and asked me if I was doing drugs. I can't even blame her. What I was saying sounded insane, but she was still nice enough to follow me into the hallway, where I made her check every nook and cranny while I stood behind her with a broom in hand. But they were all empty. As far as I could tell, all the windows were still shut, all the doors still locked. There was no sign of an intruder, but I couldn't deny what I'd seen, even if everyone else could. I barely slept that night, clutching a knife in both hands as I shivered in bed with all the lights on. By the following morning, I was close to convincing myself none of it had happened. Right up until I found my sister playing with the same cheap plastic ring straight from that video. I kept asking her where she'd found it, but she kept shaking her head and refusing to tell me. And when I complained to Mum, she made it clear she didn't have time for our, quote, little fight, and soon after left to go to work. That day passed quickly, if only because I tried hard to act like nothing had happened. But later on, when I sat down with my sister at the end of the day, leaving her to her videos, I found myself going over my phone and trying every search term possible to find the video from the day before. It was infuriating. I knew that video had existed. I knew the channel's name, but nothing I typed showed it up. Not on Google, Reddit, YouTube, or anywhere else. I became so fixated, I didn't look up from my phone for about an hour. And when I eventually did, it was already too late. There she was again. It was like she was looking straight at me through the screen. This time, she looked like Cinderella, though it's all pretty much the same to me. Again, it was all very uncanny. The head was too large, the material looked soft to the touch, the facial features were just deranged enough to make an adult feel uncomfortable. After a moment or two of staring at the camera, she sat back and gestured to a spread laid out across our coffee table. Things were arranged on it in a neat fashion, and the toys looked noticeably less cheap. There were big boxes, some of them with recognizable brands. My sister gushed with excitement as the woman took a toy labeled Bloom Dolls and showed each side of the box to the camera. I knew these toys already. I spent hours trawling Amazon and eBay looking for the best deals. As far as I could tell, there were these pots you watered, and a kind of doll popped out. The dolls are random, brightly coloured, with cheap expanding foam for hair, and they come with a bunch of accessories. The whole idea of us paying through the nose for what is, essentially, a real-life loot box ticked me off. But those kinds of toys are all the latest trend, and my sister had been going wild for them ever since her friends at school had started getting them. Both my mum and I felt it was important she didn't feel left out, so we'd started saving up early. They were all she talked about for months, an obsession that had come out of nowhere. Over half an hour, the woman unwrapped 3 Bloom dolls, poured a tiny bit of water on them, and made grand gestures as each one, slowly, burst through the paper-thin top and bloomed like a real flower. With false excitement, this strange woman gently took each one out and showed every tiny detail of the toy to the camera at each stage of its removal. When it was done, she opened the pot and showed off each accessory, waving her arms or clasping them to her chest with excitement. It all seemed like a normal unboxing video, right up until the last one. It was very quick, something a child or passing adult wouldn't have noticed, but the last pot had a speck of blood on it, and as she pulled the toy out, something fell out of the packaging. It was hard to say at the time, but it looked like a small plastic tube. On a hunch, I got down on my hands and knees by the TV and looked under the cabinet. Like I thought I would, I saw that little thing lying there. After some effort, I fished it out with the remote, and, kneeling up, horror slowly dawned on me. It was a fingertip. An ice-cold piece of meat that had started to wrinkle and dry, feeling like a prune in my hand. I looked up at the TV and saw that creepy foam head filling up the whole screen, her eyes somehow narrower than before. Uh-uh, she moaned in a childish voice, before waving a finger at me like I was a naughty child. I don't know why, but something about it freaked me out, and I immediately got up and turned the video off. Before my sister could even start to argue, my mother burst in through the door with plastic bags piled up around her wrists, her voice crying out loudly for me to come help. For a moment, I nearly went to her about the finger in my hand, but I remembered the day before and decided to leave it be. It wasn't until the following day, when I went to school and saw dozens of police around the gate, that I started to really wonder where that finger had come from. Pretty soon, I caught wind of rumours that a family, just a few doors down from my house, had been burgled. The stories about what had happened exactly changed from teller to teller, but they all went through the same rough outline. The family had been attacked, some people had been killed, and a load of toys put away for Christmas was stolen. I barely ate or spoke for the entire day, trying my best to shut out the fleeting whispered rumours. They were over the top and almost definitely exaggerated, but they struck a nerve with me anyway. They were all over the place. Stories of skulls shattered with toy pots, pets shoved into the microwave, children burned alive, and Christmas trees decorated with pulled teeth. I knew how people like to run wild with stories like those, but something about it all made my stomach turn. That night, I did a circuit of the house before entering, and just to double check, I went through the house twice with a baseball bat in one hand and my sister held firmly in the other. Then I brought her in, set her up with some stuff on Netflix, telling her that YouTube was being fixed, and sat down with a laptop. I always remember being told that fear is just a lack of knowledge, so I decided I needed to know more. I started with the channel. I looked for everything from the channel name to the characters to the toys to the
I don't know what compels me to do the very thing that fails me. I wake up still high on you, but by the night I'm crashing through. So I'd wanna kiss you, even though I miss you. Guess I just wanna know what it would feel like. I knew, oh, hey, bad ideas, eh? I know where they lead, but I got too many to see, and I can't get enough. No, I wanna. And I can't get enough. No, I wanna.
The name of the video itself, but there was nothing. It wasn't just that the video was hard to find or obscure. It was that the names of everything involved were also popular. Unboxing videos, Elsa, Cinderella, Bloom dolls, toys, toy unboxing, and even the channel name itself was incredibly bland things to try and searching for. Every term flooded me with results, and in the end, I stopped looking at those kinds of things and started looking for local news about the burglary. All I found was an article from the Gazette. The
Night I'm crashing through, so I'd wanna kiss you, even though I miss you. Guess I just wanna know what it would feel like. I knew, oh, hey, bad ideas, eh? I know where they lead, but I got too many to see, and I can't get enough. No.
cache Google link had some sort of text and headline reading, "Violent burglary has police scratching their heads." Local police have struggled to cope with a recent home invasion where at least 2 adults and 2 children have been found mutilated, all missing their ... But clicking the link just sent me to an edited version of the article explaining that the police had reached out to the paper and asked them to take down the original article out of respect to the families and in order to keep the ongoing investigation. I tried looking for the cached version of the page, but there was nothing that would load. The best I got was a thumbnail on one website showing a tiny version of the article's old preview image. It was just a Christmas tree, although it looked a little odd to me. It seemed to be speckled with bits of white. I don't know why, but that made me think about all the stories I'd heard through the day. So I searched Christmas tree decorated with teeth, and that turned up an old copypasta hosted on some crappy forum. It said, "I don't like to talk about my work, since I do crime scene cleanups, and it's something I try hard to forget. I know the police involved never got the guy who did it, and that bothers them to this day. And, at the time, the story never broke big. In some ways, I've always felt like I'm meant to keep this hush-hush, because no one else has ever talked about it. I could easily call it conspiracy, but I remember what I had to go through on that day, and I think that no one involved wants to relive it. There's no conspiracy, not really. It's like the rest of us. Every single one just decided to pretend it didn't happen. But it did happen. We all had to go into this house about a week before Christmas, being told it was all to do with a burglary gone wrong. Except, even I knew that weren't the case. First thing I noticed walking in was the sofa soaked in pee, blood and crap. Then I saw the nails on the arms and by the floor, still soaked in blood, with a little bit of flesh snagged on the head. It looks like someone had been nailed into place. The police looked distraught. No one was talking or joking or even making notes. The more I looked, the more I realized why. The windows had been nailed shut, the table had been laid, and reset multiple times. Plates stacked high in the sink. There was even a slow cooker filled with liquid fat. In a child's room, I found a small crawl space filled with old chocolate wrappers. It stank of urine. But what really messed with me were the long scratch marks on the inner walls. Someone had been hiding in there and dragged out, putting up a fight the whole way. Fighting so hard, they tore nails out and left bloodied bits of skin along the rough-edged wood. But the space was tiny, barely big enough for a toddler to hide in. All around that place was the sense of fear. I couldn't ignore it. None of us could. You know, I heard of a friend in the force that they took some of the Christmas lists on the fridge door and tested them, since they were crumpled and blooded, and they reckoned those bits of papers had gone through someone's digestive tract multiple times. I was lucky they'd taken the bodies away by the time we got there. It was still rough though, blasting away the fat and blood, finding all sorts of messed up stuff. It was everywhere. Sinkholes plugged up with gore, sockets filled with nails. Hell, one guy even found an intact light bulb stuffed with bloody hair. And that tree. All around it were teeth threaded through with bits of hair, strung around it like a tinsel. And what really got to me was that none of those teeth looked right for the family. You only had to glance to figure out it was all wrong. 4 people should equal, what, 100 teeth maybe? But there were thousands on this tree, some of them very, very old. My friend on the force told me about how only one toy was left under the tree. They traced it to a car boot sale the family had visited a few weeks before, but never found the actual seller. It was one of those Stretch Armstrong toys. You remember those? Yeah, it was one of those. All normal, except when we pulled it open and found a little sealed packet with a strip of skin inside. The police think it was some kind of mark. On a hunch, I went home and started going through the toys I'd bought my kids. I don't know what made me do it, but man, I'm glad I did. It was a Furby, all boxed up and brand new, bought from a close friend who knew a guy who knew a guy who could get it on discount. And when I shook it, I heard something inside. I opened it up and found a little packet stuffed with greasy hair. When my wife and kids came downstairs, they thought I'd gone mad. My wife especially, since I dragged all these toys out of hiding and into the living room. She was still screaming when I went to throw away the bag. Only right about then, our youngest piped up. She started crying something awful. "But how will they find us, Daddy?" she cried. "They promised they'd find us." "Who?" I asked. "The ladies on the TV." We'd taken to recording daytime TV for her as a bit of a treat, so she could catch up on all the cartoons on the weekend. Thing is, we don't know if we messed up the channel or what, because whatever we recorded didn't look right. It looked like a home video with this goofy-looking mascot dressed up as Snow White. The whole thing freaked me and the wife out, and she didn't even know the worst part. I couldn't bring myself to tell her, or even anyone else. I just made sure we'd all moved out before the end of the week, even if it did end up ruining Christmas. But those shows we taped, they'd been shot in that house. The one I'd spent all week cleaning up. I put down the computer and looked up at the TV. For a moment, I was certain I'd find that big-headed woman looking back at me. But it was just Netflix. I breathed a sigh of relief and sat there for a moment, thinking about the stories. But more than anything, I was thinking about all those toys we'd bought off eBay and third-party Amazon sellers. You know, you see a thing that's odd, but you just dismiss it. A few days back, I had emails off some of those sellers, offering a refund since the delivery hadn't come through. The only thing was, I figured it was a mistake. Every one of those packages had been delivered, so it had to be a mistake. At least, that's what I thought. I ran upstairs, my heart thundering, and tore into the closet in my mother's bedroom. I pulled the boxes out one by one until I found the one of the Bloom doll toys I bought off eBay. They were the ones with the dirtiest boxes, and deep down I suspected that meant something. I ripped apart the packages and the toys themselves until I finally had one of those dolls in hands. It was a cheap plastic thing, and with a quick and easy snap, it came apart. Inside was a little baggie, all rolled up like a cigarette. I took it out and slowly let it drop open, revealing just a few scraggly bones, the kinds that would come out of an ear, or a child's finger maybe. I knew what I had to do, so I went out into the hallway, only to be stopped dead by the sound of someone whispering. A quick peek over the banister revealed it was my younger sister. She'd gotten up from the telly and was now facing the airing cupboard under the stairs, talking to it like a secretive friend. "No," she whispered. "Toy videos won't work. They need fixing." Silence. "I'm sorry," she muttered, like she was speaking to Mom. More silence. "That's not nice. Tricks aren't nice." Again, silence, but this time interrupted by fits of giggles. "Okay," she said, struggling to hold in her laughter. "James, James," she suddenly screamed. "Doorbell." That doorbell hadn't rung. Not knowing what to do, I put one foot down on the step and heard her say, "He's coming now," followed by more secretive giggles. I knew I couldn't go downstairs, but I had to get her away from that cupboard and up to me. I thought quickly on the spot, remembering something she'd never resist, and shouted downstairs, 2 minutes, I'll come down now. I just need to move the neighbor's cat. He got in through the upstairs window again." That worked, and she ran away from the dark cupboard and straight up the stairs, repeating, "Kitty cat," with each footstep, a voice a high-pitched squeal of joy. As soon as she was up, I grabbed her, feeling tears in my eyes. "Were you trying to play a trick on me?" I asked, doing my best to sound friendly. "She said I'd get better toys," my sister said, one finger held firmly between her teeth. "The woman in the videos?" My sister nodded. I remembered I still had that bag in my back pocket, so I walked over to a nearby window, ignoring my sister's questions about the neighbor's cat, and threw it right out the window. I didn't know if it'd work, or what it even meant. I just didn't want it anywhere near us. But my sister was growing antsy. "Where's the cat?" she screamed, a tantrum forming in her voice. "Kitty cat, kitty cat, kitty cat." "Oh, it's ran away," I said, struggling to hold on to her as she started kicking and pushing away. "James," she whined, "I want to see the cat." "It's not in the bedroom anymore," I said. "You've missed it." "I'll look in the garden," she said, eyes wide with excitement. Quickly, she wriggled free and made a beeline for the stairs and disappeared down them, her pink pajamas swallowed by the darkness before I had any time to stop her. I heard her little feet thump down the hallway and into the living room, and I stayed perfectly still, waiting for any follow-up noise. There was none. I knew I couldn't leave her down there. I looked around briefly to see if there was anything I could use as a weapon, but outside of duvets and pillows, there was nothing. From downstairs, I could still hear the shuffling of feet. It could have been anything, but I couldn't stop picturing the things from that story. My heart beat in my chest. My skin felt cold and tight, my head light and dizzy. but I still forced myself to go downstairs, knowing that I had to get my sister. But the stairs were never really the problem. It was the hallway between them and the living room, the one that took me past the airing cupboard that just a few minutes ago my sister had been whispering to. The one I'd spent hours imagining that strange woman crouched in, her eyes fixed on me through the walls and shadows. The cupboard door moved. Just an inch, but it definitely moved. Just beyond, just a meter or two past that dark space, was the door to our living room, and I could hear the sound of my little
Too many to see, and I can't get enough. No. I don't know what compels me to do the very thing that fails me. I wake up still high on you, but by the night I'm crashing through. So I'd wanna kiss you, even though I miss you. Guess I just wanna know what it would feel like. I know, oh, hey, bad ideas, eh? I know where they lead, but I got too many to see, and I can't get enough. No, I wanna kiss you standing up. Oh no. And I can't get enough. No, I wanna kiss you standing up. Oh no. I don't know what compels me to do the very thing that fails me. I wake up still high on you, but by the night I'm crashing through. So I'd wanna kiss you, even though I miss you. Guess I just wanna know what it would feel like. I know, oh, hey, bad ideas, eh? I know where they that fills me. I wake up still high on you, but by the night I'm crashing through. So I'd wanna kiss you, even though I miss you. Guess I just wanna know what it would feel like. I knew, oh, hey, bad ideas, eh? I know where they lead, but I got too many to sleep, and I can't get enough. No, I wanna kiss you standing up. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. I don't know what compels me to do the very thing that fills me. I wake up still high on you, but